So last week we talked about how to tool the map. We went step by step and showed you how to do that. This week we're going to talk about how to color it, how to age it, how to weather it so it looks like it's a couple of 100 years old. I'm even going to show you how to get that natural edge all the way around the map, all four sides, and that's something that eludes a lot of people. So let's go ahead and jump in and get started. So now we're going to add the color and the age to the map. One of the things that we're going to be doing with that is we're going to give this more of a natural edge. Just because this came out of the center of a piece of 1 ounce liner doesn't mean that you have to have these super straight edges on it. And I'm going to show you how to do that real quick. So what I've got here is a scalpel. This on the back, that it digs into my hand. It's just a flat scalpel, and it's not all that comfortable when I use it for long periods of time. So that's just a paper towel wrapped in some painter's tape. But I've got a blade here on it, and what I'm going to do with the blade is I'm going to very lightly score the top of the map. So all I'm trying to do is cut through the, let's call it cut through the skin of the leather. I'm not cutting all the way through it. And this is best done when it's more or less dry. Just a little bit of pressure, and I'm getting as much of a jagged edge in there as I can. This technique for getting a raw edge on a piece of leather is not original to me. I picked this up on Chuck Dorsett's channel. He does videos for Weaver. Great source of information, and this technique came from him. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start by just cutting a little notch into it right there, and I'm going to connect that notch to my score line. That just gives me a place to start. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to pull. If I get it in camera. So I got one hand here so it doesn't go anywhere. I'm going to grab the other one and pull. Score that again. Looks like it didn't go quite deep enough on there, so we're going to score it again. Get that started. Start pulling again. So now you can see it had a really crisp edge like this on it. And as you can tell, it's got a nice ragged edge on it. Looks completely natural. If you want to take this even further, and we may do this in a second, you can hit that with some sandpaper. Just go out, away from the center, and you can kind of grind and soften up that edge there. But this right here works really well for creating that natural edge that we're looking for in the pirate map. Now we're going to do the other three sides. All the way around, you get a nice ragged edge. Looks like something that a pirate would easily roll up and throw in their bag. Now we're going to add a resist to it, and the resist is going to help us create a couple of different shades within the map. We don't want it all one color. We want to be able to create some varying tones and depth here. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take some synthetic wool, going to cut this, and then we're going to trim it down so it's not quite so fuzzy. I find that if you don't trim it down, what happens is you lose a lot of your resist in the pad. It just stays there, it never comes out, so you're using a lot more of it. But if you'll trim it down like this, a lot more of what you put into it will actually come out. Just make sure you go through and fuzz it up real good. Try to get all the loose fibers out of there, because you don't want those ending up in your piece. I use tan coat. You can use whatever you want to use, but I like tan coat. For me, it doesn't tend to streak as badly. So if it's a piece that I can touch, and by touch I mean rub the resist into, then I'll use tan coat. If it's been painted and I don't want to touch it, I'll use an aerosol sealer. But for this, I'm just going to use tan coat. I'm just putting on a light coat. I'm not trying to, seal this thing to be able to withstand the elements. I just want to keep the antique from too aggressively sinking into it. Okay, so we're going to save this because we're going to come back and use that in a little while. And for now, we're going to give that about 30 minutes, let it dry really good. You don't want to add any antique to it until it's not tacky anymore. If it still feels tacky, then that stickiness is going to hold on to the antique and really affect the final outcomes. Okay, real quick, apparently my camera decided that recording the antiquing process wasn't important. So I'm gonna walk you through it real quick. It's very simple. What you need is Phoebing's Tan Antique Paste. And you're gonna take a napkin or a dauber or whatever it is you wanna use and spread it liberally all over the map. The important part is that it gets down in all the crevices. So while you're at it, if you're finding the video helpful, give us a thumbs up and a subscribe. And we're going to have instructions for you in a minute on how you can win the map that I'm making in the video. So keep an eye out for that. All right, now that we've got the first layer done, what we're going to do is we're going to come back in and we're going to add antique to just the areas where the water is at. I want to keep it off of the islands. But the nice thing about antique is if you do get some up there, because it's been sealed, we can just wipe it off. And then we're going to let that sit for about 5 minutes. You'll notice as I go through and I'm putting it around the edges, I'm not being super careful to keep it off the island. And that is because I'm going to come back with a paper towel. The easiest way to do this is just wrap it around your finger like that. And then I'm going to go through and trace my finger along the shoreline and lift off that antique that got into the areas where I don't want it to be. One of the keys to making this work is swapping out for a new area. You can't really let the antique build up on the end of your finger on that napkin, so every time I come across and I wipe something off, I'm switching to a new area. And that's why I'm using paper towels on it, because one, it's effective, and two, they're cheap, and I don't mind burning through them pretty quickly. So that's all I'm going to do there. I'm going to spread that out. I want to get all the way to the edge of this. I'm going to hit the edges. We're going to be doing that more later, but while I'm here, I'm going to put some on it. And we're just going to do that all the way around. I'm not worried about is it consistent or anything like that. This particular piece, almost the worse it looks, the better it looks. Keep switching out that fresh napkin over the end of your finger so that you get a nice clean pickup when you go to remove that antique. And you'll notice I'm always working from the middle to the outside edge. That way I'm pushing antique away from the center. Well, let's let that sit for a couple of minutes and then we'll come back and we'll clean it up. Well, it's been about 5 minutes and now we can go ahead and take the antique off the top. If I notice it's taking too much off, then I'm going to put a little bit more back on there and let it sit for a little while. With this piece of work being so flat, I'm just going to take a traditional, just a napkin from your kitchen table and I'm going to gently wipe it off. Now eventually I'm going to go back with a piece of wool, but for now I just want to get the residue, the extra stuff off with something simple like a paper towel. And I want to wipe, one, I want to make sure I don't get any on the center with my fingers, and two, I'm wiping away from the land masses. So I'm wiping away from what I want what I want to keep the antique off of. Now here with the islands, that's a little tougher to do. You can already see that we've got a big color difference between the land mass and the water, and that's all we're looking for, is just something to separate the two. So I've got a Q-tip here. I just sprayed a little water on the tip of it. I'm going to go back and I'm going to lift a little bit more of that antique off the islands. So now what I want to do is I want to go back and I'm going to take that original piece of wool that we laid all the antique down with, and I'm going to hit the edges. I want all these raw edges to look as bad as possible. We've got a nasty, dirty pirate who's, doesn't bathe but once a year unless he gets thrown in the ocean. And that's what he's handling this thing with. So I want the edges to be as dirty as possible. I want to keep that fuzz there though, so, if it lays down, stand it back up. The idea here is we're just going to go through and dirty up those edges. All I'm doing this time is just making sure there's not too much excess on that edge, because I don't want that to rub off on whoever's handling it. The way to do this is just grab and pull straight out. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and add some more shading around the island. And it's not going to take that long, but it is going to add a big difference to it. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to grab my dark brown. I guess I could show you the actual label instead of just where I wrote it on there. This is dark brown by Phoebing's. With this, I'm just going to go in with a Q-tip. And again, what this is designed to do is separate the land mass from the ocean. But for now, I think we're doing good. So I've got a clean Q-tip here. I'm going to go through and lift that dark brown off any of the areas where I don't want it. And I'm really just focusing on the coves. So all I'm doing right now is I'm going back and I'm blending the edge of where this darker antique sits. I don't want to have a hard line, so I'm just using my paper towel to kind of smooth that out and create as much of a soft blended edge as I can. If you happen to get it up on the island like I just did, just wipe it off. That's what we did before. You can always go back with a Q-tip or even a damp Q-tip and make sure you get it all off. This is how we're creating those super crisp edges, even though we don't have a lot of depth in the leather itself. Go back, I'm going to put some of that darker antique on the pirate ship so it stands out really nicely. So we've let this sit for about 10 minutes now. We're going to go back and buff off the darker areas. Again, I'm just using a paper towel for this level of it. You know, as I've said multiple times, if this was a much deeper, more intense carving, I would probably be using synthetic wool or something like that. But because this is so flat, just going to go with something that doesn't have a lot of surface to it. And I'm really not trying to take much of this off. I'm just trying to take the excess off of it. There we go. So if you remember from earlier, we saved this piece of wool that's got tan coat in it. I'm going to buff back over the top of this to, one, brighten it up a little bit, and two, to add another thin coat of sealer onto it. Then we'll let it sit for a few minutes. I'm not going to add any additional tan coat to it. Sometimes I do. It depends on how deep the carving is. But with this one, we're just going to go ahead and use what's already in here. So just lightly buff over it. Then we're going to let that sit for just a few minutes. You can see it didn't take very much off of it, but it did take some. So we're just going to let that sit for a few minutes and get to where it's not tacky. So now that second coat of resist has had a chance to dry, it's not tacky anymore. We're going to go back in, and what we're going to do now is we're going to add in the weathering and the age that would naturally develop on something like this over the years. So if you think about it, if a pirate is going to be standing over a map, he's probably going to be, you know, a larger one. He'd be standing with his hands like that. He might push it back that way. If he's rolling it up, his hands are going to be hitting here. Once he does have it rolled up, the edges of it are going to take a lot of abuse. So that's all the different parts that we're going to focus on right now. This is the piece of wool that we used originally to put the tan antique on there. And all I'm going to do with this is I'm very lightly going to go through and start stippling in some grime and some dirt. So try to be a little strategic about where you put this. Obviously the edges are going to be a little dirtier, but you don't want it to be consistent all the way across. You can see that it's kind of blotchy here. So we're going to do this in layers. Don't get too aggressive with it right away. But let's go through and see how we can add some color to the edges of this. You'll notice I'm going straight down. I'm not really twisting or anything like that, although you can. What we're doing is we're just trying to let it gently and softly transfer. In a minute we're going to switch over to a napkin, and I'm going to show you another way that we can do it there as well. The drier it gets, the more you're going to have to push, the more aggressive you're going to have to be with this. Okay, so we've got most of the tan out of there. I'm going to switch over now to the dark brown. So I'm going to take that same piece of wool. I'm going to reach down there and just get a little bit. You know, I'm not really worried about it being consistent on the wool because I'm going to be dabbing it off. So I'm going to go up here and all I'm going to do is on this paper, I'm going to dab it off. It's going to be off camera, but I'm going to get as much off of it as I can. So you can see it's pretty soft on there, and I'm just going to go back and I'll start very lightly adding in that grime. The edges would be much darker than the center of it. So, you know, for now, let's go heavier out here, and we can adjust it as we go if we need to. Make sure you don't hold this the same all the way through it. You want to change your grip on it, because that will allow you to get a different impression when it hits. You can take this as far or as light as you want. Now that we've got it on there, we know that an antique will come off. So like this over here, for my taste, it's a little dark. I'm gonna go back in and I'm gonna press and lift, press and lift. It's a pretty firm press that I've got going there. I'm not twisting, I'm just blotting and lifting. If you do want to lighten it up, you can go back in here and do just like you did before. Just very lightly rub it out. This is definitely where you want to go in circles. You don't want those lines in there. If you start getting lines, go back to your blotting technique. Okay, so that looks really good. I like that. Much darker on the edges than we are in the center. It looks like it's gone through the war. Now I'm going to focus on the edges and the back. And we'll flip this over. We're going to do the exact same thing. But for now, I'm only going to focus on the ends of it. And this is just going to be a light drag. So I'm going to hit it and pull. And I'm going to the outside of it for now. If I start getting repeating marks on there, I'm going to change my grip on it a little bit. Probably go back to the tan, get some more of that in there. Blot that out. Keep in mind, when you put the fresh antique in there, you want to go really light with your touch. The fresher that addition of antique is, the lighter the required touch. All I'm doing is I'm going very lightly across the back of it, letting that natural nap that's on the back of it pick it up. Flip it around and do the same thing on the other end. Again, I'm going to focus more on the very, very outside edges than I would anywhere else. Put a little bit more of that dark brown back on there. Blot it out. And go back and add some more in. We want that multi-tone look. That's really what's going to sell it for us. Okay. Now that we've got it looking about as ugly as we can, about as grimy as we can, I would encourage you not to leave any truly white places in there. Get it good and dirty. Now we're going to roll it up. So here's where you're going to want to decide how you're going to secure it. For me, I'm going to put a strap on it so that it's kind of part of the piece. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to put 2 parallel notches right here. So I got to dirty that up just a little bit. So the easiest way to do that is to go back to our wool and just kind of work it down in there a little bit. Flip it over, do the same thing on the other side. And then we're going to hit it again with the paper towel. I'll just lift it off. That way it makes it look like it's supposed to be there. Looks like I lifted off a little too much, so let's rework that back in. Blot it out again. There we go. Perfect. Okay, so now this is going to be the end that needs to be on the outside because that's where the strap is going to be, which means this is the part that's going to be rolled up. Well, first I'm going to need to get some more antique in my wool here. blot that out. So it's ready to go. Set that right there to the side. And now I'm going to roll it up. The idea here is we want to weather this and age it so that this is the part that would naturally be on the outside. Well, what would happen to the outside of it here? Well, it's going to get a lot dirtier than the part that's on the inside. The end of it's going to get a lot dirtier as well. So I'm just going to go through here and I'm going to start hitting this with different color antiques just to see how dirty I can get it. See if I can make it look a little bit more authentic. You'll notice I've got the top piece laid against the bottom piece, and I'm going straight across it because I want to create that little silhouette that's under it. One of my favorite YouTube channels is Adam Savage Tested, and he goes through and he makes props and all that kind of stuff, and he talks a lot about how to antique and weather things. And the biggest thing that he preaches is that you have to think about how it would naturally weather. Where's the dirt going to land? Where's it not going to land? Where's it going to be the worst? Where's it going to be the lightest? And that's what we're trying to do here. So I'm going to leave it at that, and you'll notice when I roll this piece back, it creates a natural kind of shadow where this wants to sit. So it makes a lot of sense that it would be like that. It's kind of sticky to the touch right now, so we're going to let this dry because we don't want whoever's handling it to end up with antique on their hands. Then we're going to seal the front and the back. I'm going to show you how to do that. But for now, let's just set this down and let it dry as is. Well, really all that's left is to seal it. And with something like this, I like to use an aerosol. So the first thing that we're going to hit this with would be Fiebing's Leather Sheen. Now, the one thing I don't like about this for this particular product is this is, by its name, going to give it a sheen or a shine to it, and parchment wouldn't naturally shine. But I've got a solution for that. So I can't do this on camera because I don't have any ventilation in here. So I'm going to take it outside. I'm going to spray it there. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold it about 12 to 14 inches above the leather, and I'm going to go over it, back and forth, and that's considered one coat. So I'm going to do that probably 5 or 6 times, let it dry to the touch between each one. The thing I would tell you is that when you spray this, it should not look wet. If you have a wet look to it, you're either too close to it or you're putting it on too heavy. I'm going to do that to the front and the back. Then once that's good and dry, maybe less than 5 minutes, I'm going to come back with Rust-Oleum Matte Clear. You can also use, let me get that in camera frame there. You can also use, I think Krylon has a good one too. And I'm going to do the exact same thing with this. 12 to 14 inches off the leather, spray it, do a full coat, and then probably do that 5 to 6 times, front and back. And if you do that, it should lock everything in place. It looks dirty, but it shouldn't get your hands dirty. So I'm going to go do that. Be right back. All right. So we just got back from sealing it. I sprayed it with the leather sheen. I think I put 4 to 5 coats on there, and I did the same thing with the Rust-Oleum matte finish. As you can see, it's got a little bit of a shine to it, but not that much. On the back of it, it's the same. I can run my hand up over it, and none of the antique comes off. Same for the front. It looks filthy, but it's not going to get you dirty. So now what I want to do, we've got the 2 holes here that we created for the leather strap. I'm going to create a loop. Push that through the first one, the one that's the closest to the inside. Then I'm going to push it back through the other one. I'll take my 2 leads, feed those through the loop, and then gently cinch that down. So what that does for us, as I roll this up, I'm then able to take my leather straps. Let's go this way with one, that way with the other one, and I can tie it off. Just like you might imagine some old pirate doing back, a long time ago, several hundred years ago. And that's how we do our pirate map. It's that easy. Give us a thumbs up and a subscribe if you found the video helpful, and I'll see you next time.